Ian ran out of gas in front of the Eastgate shopping plaza and stumbled to a halt. He wheezed. Far enough. And hunched over to catch his breath. He gripped his side and gasped. Can't run anymore. Gonna pass out. Mariana waited beside him impatiently, tapping her shoe at a nervous rhythm as Ian struggled to not puke on the sidewalk. He was paler than milk, and his eyes were glassy with shock. I hit her with a rock. She's gonna be really mad now. She was already pretty mad, Mariana said faintly. I don't think it matters. Ian forced himself to stand up straight. The nausea had passed, but the stitch in his side still hurt like fire. He spat out a sour wad of phlegm and asked, Do you think she went after Scotty? Mariana shook her head slowly. She said, I don't know. I got a text from him as I was leaving the house. He told me to meet you guys at the Dragon Tree. I haven't heard from him since. That probably wasn't him, Ian croaked in a wooden tone. It was her. Mariana pressed her lips together in an unhappy line and said, Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it. Can you at least walk now? The police station isn't that far from here. Ian's answer was interrupted by the sound of gunshots from somewhere in the plaza, followed by a high-pitched scream. Ian and Mariana both ducked down, and Mariana whimpered, Where did that come from? I think it came from the store with the old guy who always wears the same green pants. It must be a robbery or something. Mariana shook her head. When do we ever have an armed robbery in this town? Now I have a feeling it's got something to do with our favorite substitute teacher. Let's sneak up and have a look. They scrambled up to the corner of the building and pressed themselves flat against the wall on either side of the entrance. Ian carefully leaned over to have a peek through the glass door. He whispered, It's her. She's got her foot on someone's neck. I think it's a cop. There was a muffled scream from inside the store. Ian made a face and pressed himself back against the wall. I think she just killed the cop. The second scream was definitely Scotty. We gotta go on the count of 3. Are you ready? No, Mariana said in a small, miserable voice. And she slipped off her necklace with trembling fingers. Start counting. Mrs. Blackmoore filled the doorway of the broom closet, blotting out the light and plunging Scotty into darkness. He squinted his eyes shut against his own terror and yelled, Fuck off and leave me alone! Mrs. Blackmoore opened her mouth to issue a witty retort, and there was a soft ding as someone entered through the front entrance. She gritted her teeth in frustration and hissed, Oh, for the love of Pete! Keep forgetting to lock the damn door! She turned to confront the new interloper and looked genuinely surprised to see Ian and Mariana walk up to the snack food aisle. She narrowed her eyes and said, What's this? Why aren't you hiding beneath your beds, you fools? Have you gone daft? Mariana let the silver chain slither out of her hand, and she started to whirl it around in a tight circle. She advanced on Mrs. Blackmoore with her teeth bared in an unconscious snarl. Ian trailed close behind her with a large can of fruit cocktail mix clutched in either hand. Mariana yelled, Get away from us! And Mrs. Blackmoore flinched from the commanding tone in her voice. She didn't understand what was happening. Even though she had terrorized these children to their very core, the fire of the fight still burned in their eyes. It had been so long since anyone dared to stand against her. Mrs. Blackmoore had forgotten something very important. The bonds of true friendship are more powerful than fear. She backed away from Mariana's twirling chain, her handbag braced in front of her like a shield. She sneered, Do you think you can defeat me with a necklace, my girl? Mercy, no. You put that down right now, right this instant, and get in the damn bag. While her full attention was focused on Mariana, Ian seized the opportunity to launch one of his fruit cocktails. It whizzed through the air and bounced off her forehead with a dull thud. Cutting off her words and making her stumble into mid-step, Mariana darted in without hesitation and whipped her across the face with the chain. There was a sizzling pop when the silver made contact with her skin, and the substitute howled in agony. She rammed through a display of snack foods to escape the unexpected assault, sending bags of peanuts and potato chips flying in all directions. She stamped her foot in a childish rage and bellowed, How dare you! How dare you do that to me! She drew out the last syllable in a scream of childish outrage, and then abruptly collapsed into a shapeless, writhing cloud of mist. It reared up and surged towards the door, a boiling river of nightmares and midnight. There was a tremendous crash as the door exploded in a spray of twisted metal and broken glass. And then she was gone. The two of them stood amongst the wreckage and stared at the ragged hole in the wall that used to be a doorway. Ian took in a deep, shuddering breath and moaned, I don't want to do this anymore. Mariana pushed past him and cautiously ventured outside. The sidewalk was covered in a litter of glass. A scattering of people were drifting closer to see what was going on, some of them already filming with their cell phones. Mariana grunted, oh crap, and darted back into the store. Ian was herding an extremely shaken-looking Scotty to the front of the store. His hair was a sweaty, tangled mop, and his blue jeans had been torn wide open at the knee, revealing a large scrape that was still oozing blood. Scotty wheezed. She almost got me. I think I pissed myself a little bit. Ian gave him a clumsy side hug and crowed, We almost got her. You should have seen the look on her face. She couldn't believe we were standing up to her. She didn't know what to do. Mariana grimaced and shook her head. We surprised her. She won't be surprised next time. Scotty hauled his phone out of his pocket and said, Next time? It ain't gonna be a next time. What are you even talking about? I'm not gonna do shit except call 911. You know, like a normal person. Are you freaking crazy? Mariana vaguely motioned at the body on the floor. She said, They can't stop her. The goofy witch costume and all that stuff? That's not the real Mrs. Blackmoore. It's just an act. She looks like a scary cartoon character, but the real Mrs. Blackmoore is a lot worse. She isn't human anymore. Scotty waved his phone at her and snorted, I don't know, Mariana, that kinda sounds like a good reason to call the cops. Quietly, Ian said, Her bag's alive. They're almost like partners or something. She feeds it, and the bag powers her magic. It's her familiar, Mariana replied. Her brow was furrowed in thought. They need each other to exist. Scotty pointedly cleared his throat and motioned at the entrance. An older man in jean shorts and a Bermuda shirt was standing in the shattered doorway. He was recording the aftermath of their encounter with his mouth hanging open in disbelief. Scotty whispered, Let me handle this. He jumped in front of his friends and shrieked, You're violating our rights! In a voice that could be heard from miles. The man flinched back and tried to speak out in his defense, but Scotty just dialed the volume a little higher and yelled over him. When it became clear the wild-eyed kid with the red hair wasn't about to quit anytime soon, the man wisely decided to tuck his phone away and beat a hasty retreat. A mingling wail of multiple sirens began to rise in the distance. Mariana took each of her friends by the hand, gave them a firm squeeze, and said, We better leave before they get here. Let's go. Ian pulled his hand back and exclaimed, Wait a second! Scotty's right. We should tell the cops and let them figure it out. We're just kids, you know? We can't do this alone. No, Mariana said faintly. They won't know how to fight her, and they'll let her get away. Scotty threw up his hands and groaned. We don't know how to fight her either. What are we gonna do? Throw some more cans at her? I don't want to die, Mariana. What's so hard to understand about that? Ian gave Mariana a grim look and said, He's got a point. What are we supposed to do? She said something about getting wrapped in silver chains. If that's the only way to beat her, we're screwed. If she talked about it, it's probably happened to her before, Mariana countered. She's still here, so it obviously didn't kill her. No, we have to make it so she can't ever come back again. Yeah? But how, Mariana? Scott demanded. I think Ian's right. If we try to take her on, we're screwed. Both of you just listen for a second, Mariana pleaded. Okay? Just listen. Look, do you remember how the dragon tree really did look like a dragon when we were little? We used to pretend it was alive. Even now you can still see it if you stretch your imagination a bit, right? Imagination is kind of like magic. It's way stronger when you're a kid. In another 10 years, we'll be all thinking about finding a career and paying our bills. We won't be able to see the dragon anymore. When you're an adult, you start worrying all the time. And it kills the magic. I mean, you're not wrong, Scotty said impatiently. But what's your point? Mariana gave an unhappy smile and answered, Mrs. Blackmoore goes after kids because she needs that magic inside us. I think we can use it against her. Scotty gaped at her in disbelief and sputtered, This isn't a freaking movie, Mariana. Like, we're not just going to defeat the bad guys because we believe in ourselves. It's just stupid. We can't do this. We're just kids, Mariana finished. She took a deep breath and said, I get that you're scared. Me too. I don't want to do this, like, at all. It's not fair. But responsibility isn't always a choice. And things aren't always fair. Scotty wiped a shimmer of a tear from his eyes with the collar of his t-shirt. He cleared his throat and croaked, "Yeah, well, it's dumb and it sucks." As gently as possible, Mariana told him, "We're all growing up, Scotty. We won't be kids for much longer. It has to be us. And it has to be now. If we don't stop her, she'll just keep doing what she's doing forever. And it'll be our fault for not standing up to her when we had the chance." Scotty pressed his lips together in a tight line. He sniffled. "Still dumb and it still sucks. But okay, fine. Where are we going?" Ian said, "I bet she probably went back to the school. It would be too suspicious if she just left without a word." "Yeah, and maybe grabbed a few more kids while she's at it," Mariana muttered. "Not if we can help it. Here, give me a second." Mariana grabbed a notebook and a pen from a display of impulse items beside the counter, and she quickly wrote something down. She examined her work, then added a few more hasty strokes with a pen before carefully tearing out the page. She folded it into her pocket and said, "Okay, let's go." Hey, what about him?" Scotty asked and pointed at the cashier. The old man was still frozen in place, one hand clutching the counter, the other raised to ward off Mrs. Blackmoore's touch. Mariana hesitated and then said, "I think he'll be okay. We'll see." A fire truck came screaming past as they hurried down the street, followed by an ambulance and 2 police cruisers. Ian turned his head and watched them go by. His feet felt like they were made of lead, but he didn't feel nauseous anymore. And that was a start. He looked at Mariana and asked, "What if we don't win? What happens then?" Mariana didn't respond, but she didn't have to. They all knew the answer to the question. If they failed to defeat Mrs. Blackmoore, there would be no fairy tale ending. "10 minutes later, they were standing in front of the school's main entrance. Scotty turned to the other two and said, "Does this look, different to you guys?" The entrance did indeed look very different. The big double doors appeared to be much taller and narrower than they were just yesterday. They were set far back in a deep, dark alcove that reminded Ian a little too much of a cave. He peered into the menacing gloom and felt his heartbeat quicken. He sighed. "Yeah, she's definitely here. Okay, let's get this over with." They stepped out of the warm sunshine and into a damp, clammy twilight of rancid smells and deep shadows. Mariana opened the flashlight app on her phone, revealing crumbling brickwork that was shrouded in multiple layers of spiderwebs. The spiders were pale, bloated, poisonous-looking things, some of them almost as big as her hand. Their eyes glinted a deep crimson in the white glare of the flashlight. Scotty grimaced and rubbed his hand on his jeans, a compulsive gesture of disgust. "Holy crap, look at those things! Like golf balls with legs!" Mariana curled her lip and delicately brushed a thick mantle of spiderwebs away from the door handle. She wiped her hand on the leg of her pants and said, "Ignore it. She's trying to get under our skin. Listen, we go straight to Mr. Delvin's office, okay? Just ignore everything around you and keep moving." The door swung open with an ominous squeal of corroded hinges. The floor, walls, and even the ceiling of the vestibule appeared to be crusted with a copious amount of dried blood. It smelled like rancid meat and copper. Ian could taste it on his tongue. "Keep going," Mariana said briskly, and she pushed her companions through the interior doors that opened into the main corridor. It was pitch black in the corridor, and the feral stench of the air made the stink of the gore-spattered vestibule seem like freshly laundered bedsheets in comparison. The puny glow emanating from Mariana's phone could barely penetrate the all-encompassing darkness, leaving them blind beyond the radius of 6 or 7 feet. Mariana whispered, "Keep going," but there wasn't much conviction behind her words. The other two turned on their flashlight apps and they continued, slowly revealing a madhouse nightmare of a hallway with no doors, light, or discernible features of any kind. Just endless white walls boxing in an endless white floor, capped by a seemingly infinite stretch of white ceiling tiles above their heads. Scotty turned to shine his light behind them and he asked, "So, What if this just keeps going forever? Ian glared at him. Don't say things like that, he grunted. That isn't helping. It's getting smaller, Scotty insisted. Are you telling me you can't see that? Ian muttered. It's not getting smaller. Stop freaking yourself out. Scotty retorted. Look at this, dumbass. I can almost touch the ceiling now, and that smell. It smells like ass in here, my guy. It smells like the monkey house at the zoo. He's right, Mariana interjected. The hallway is getting smaller. Ignore it. She's messing with us. Scotty gasped. I don't like this kind of shit. I don't like feeling closed in. You guys know I got really bad claustrophobia. I think you mean claustrophobia, Ian corrected. And Scotty rounded on him with a wild look in his eyes. He snarled. Thanks, Dr. Douchebag. You know what I meant. It's like smaller in here, and it's dark, and it reeks like my grandma's bathroom when she takes her Metamucil. Can't you smell that? Fuck this bullshit. F-U-C-K, fuck this stupid shit. Mariana whirled around and yelled, Keep it together! Scotty flinched. He was struggling not to cry. She lowered her voice and said, The only reason she's doing this to us is to make us turn back. If she's trying to make us turn back, it's because she's scared. And if she's scared, do you know what that means? It means we have a chance. A chance, Scotty repeated. He didn't sound particularly impressed, but he was no longer teetering on the edge of panic. Yeah, sure, okay. Yeah, I think I'm okay, He trailed off, then whispered, Be quiet for a second. Do you hear that? Ian held his breath and listened. Somewhere up ahead of them, a child was softly weeping in the darkness. They all gave each other a look of dread. And then Mariana was lunging to catch Scotty by the back of his shirt as he turned to run. She grabbed him up in a bear hug and hissed, It's just an illusion. It's a magic trick. Whatever it is, it's not real. Says you, Scotty whooped breathlessly. I don't care. I don't want to see it. The sniffling and moaning was drawing closer. Ian called out, Who's there? Who is that? A small, frail shadow stepped into the puny glow, and they all screamed in unison. It was Molly Rogers. Her flesh appeared to be partially mummified beneath the dirty rags of her clothes, and her teeth were poking out from behind the dried-out strings of her lips in a ghastly grin. In a low, grating voice, she said, I'm all alone in the dark, and it hurts. The faceless crowd was forming behind her, filling the narrow space with their dragging footsteps and groans of torment. There were hundreds of lost souls standing in the gloom, and maybe even thousands. They were dead, but they were also somehow hideously alive and aware. The smell was almost unbearable. You can still save yourselves, Molly pleaded, and she reached for Mariana with a bony, withered hand. Mariana drew away with a sharp exhalation of disgust. Ian stepped in front of her and stammered, We might be scared, but so are you, Mrs. Blackmoore. We're still coming for you. Molly's skeletal face contorted with rage. She shook her bony little fists and cried out, Come for me then, brat! You'll die like all the rest. You'll suffer in the dark! In the space of a heartbeat, the trio abruptly found themselves standing in front of the door to the main office. The lights were on. Students were milling through the hall on their way back from recess, and everything appeared to be business as usual. Ian peered into the office through the glass. Everything looked normal enough at a casual glance, but he knew Mrs. Blackmoore was waiting for them. She was afraid of them, but she was angry too, and she didn't like loose ends. Scotty looked immensely relieved. He waved a hand to their surroundings and asked, Is she still here? I mean, everything looks normal to me. Maybe she left. No, Ian murmured. She's still here. Look at the door to the principal's office. From their vantage point, it was possible to see down the short hall that led to Mr. Delvin's office. The generic composite wood door had been transformed into a forbidding medieval doorway, replete with a rounded arch and hardware that was hand-forged from iron. Right, Scott said dejectedly. Okay then, tally-ho. They pushed through the door and breezed past the reception counter, all of them striving to avoid making eye contact with the office staff. No one appeared to notice them. They slipped down the short hallway to Mr. Delvin's office and stood before the sinister door with eyes like saucers. Scotty whispered, "Okay, so what's the plan?" Mariana grasped the iron ring pull and whispered back, I don't really have a plan. Are you guys ready?" The boys looked at each other and reluctantly nodded. Mariana took a deep breath and fought the urge to bolt out of the office. None of them were ready, including her, but it was far too late to worry about that now. "Here we go," she said, and she pulled open the door. The wild-eyed trio burst inside like a SWAT team, startling Mr. Delvin and making him drop his pen with a sharp gasp of surprise. The mild-mannered principal stared at their wide eyes and trembling lips, and he asked, "What are you doing in my office? Something wrong?" Mariana held up her necklace in a threatening manner and hissed, "I know it's you hiding behind that stupid bow tie. You've got nowhere else to run." The principal's mouth dropped open in shock. He sputtered, "What on earth are you talking about? What's going on here?" Completely wired on fear and adrenaline, Scotty shouted, "We know it's you!" and pounded his skinny fists on Mr. Delvin's desk for dramatic effect. A framed picture of the principal's children fell to the floor with a sound of breaking glass. "Where's your bag, bitch, huh? Why don't you just haul out that disgusting bag of yours and shove it up your ass, because you are history!" Mr. Delvin gaped at the three wild-eyed intruders and shuddered. "What in the world are you... Where's my bag? What does that even mean? And you, why are you waving a necklace at me? Explain yourselves immediately." Hesitantly, Mariana asked, "Mr. Delvin, is it actually you?" Who did you think I was?" the principal demanded. His expression of complete shock was slowly being replaced by red-faced anger. "Of course it's me! You think someone else actually wants to impersonate the principal of a public school? I can assure you that no one in the entire history of the world has ever wanted to do that." Ian could feel himself wilting on the spot. He tried to speak, but nothing came out except for a vaguely apologetic squeak. "You have something to add, Ian? I'm all ears over here, people. Explain yourselves." Scotty clasped his hand together in a pleading gesture and gave Mr. Delvin the puppy dog eyes. "We're like, really sorry, for real, but there's something you need to know before you get mad, okay?" "Young man, you just called me a bitch," Mr. Delvin thundered. "You broke a framed picture of my children, for God's sake." Mariana clenched her necklace tightly in her fist, her brow wrinkled with a suspicious frown. She tapped the desk with her knuckles to get the principal's attention and asked, "Did Mrs. Blackmoore come to see you today? Was she just here?" Mr. Delvin glowered at her and snapped, "It isn't your place to ask that sort of question, but yes, she left about 10 minutes ago. She had an unexpected emergency and had to leave immediately. Now I have a question of my own, people. Why were you all marked absent today?" Before anyone could answer, there was a muffled thump as something fell off the unburdened shelf beside the desk. Mr. Delvin scooted his rolling chair over to the corner of his desk and said, "Oh, that's unfortunate. Must have forgotten her purse. She'll have to come back for it." He tried to sound casual, but the principal's mood has visibly brightened at the prospect of seeing Mrs. Blackmoore one more time. The kids each gave each other a knowing look. Mariana said, "Okay, this might be a strange question, but what does that bag look like?" Mr. Delvin looked uncertain. He said, "Well, it looks like a woman's handbag. Not sure what you're driving at, Mariana." She gave him a grim look and asked, "How about Mrs. Blackmoore? What does Mrs. Blackmoore look like?" "What does she look like? She's... A muddy look of confusion swept over the principal's face, and for a fleeting moment, he looked lost and afraid. Then he smiled to himself and said, "Oh, she's in her early 30s, about 5.5 feet tall. Think she's of Mediterranean descent. Gorgeous smile." Mr. Delvin was no longer speaking to anyone in particular. He had lapsed into a sort of a waking dream state. His eyes rolled slowly back in his head, and he live-streamed the inner monologue of his own subconscious desires. "She looks a lot like someone I used to know," Mr. Delvin mused to himself. "A neighbor from down the street. She's a fine-looking lady, and I mean, everything was right where you wanted it to be." The principal rested his hand on the bag as he spoke, mauling it with an increasing intensity as he poured out a long-repressed fantasy about a woman who'd probably never even known his name. The bag emitted a soft, warning growl. But Mr. Devlin didn't seem to notice. He was lost in his own darkness. He wrung his hands together and panted. She was a curvy gal, like a pin-up girl. I just wanted to lay my hands on her, you know? I needed it. And so that's exactly what I did. I followed her home one night. When she got to her door, I put my hands on her neck, and I squeezed. As he said the word squeezed, Mr. Devlin clenched a sweaty handful of the ancient leather and violently twisted it. The handbag let out a sharp yipe in response, and the principal's hand abruptly disappeared as the zipper clamped around his wrist with a ferocious crunch. Mr. Devlin sprang up from his chair and fell on his ass on the floor, holding his spurting appendage and screaming at the top of his lungs. The kids lunged for the door, but of course, it wasn't really a door at all. It was Mrs. Blackmoore, unmasked, ancient, and terrible to behold. Her face was a bloated, wrinkled mess of warts and random tufts of hair, and two tusk-like canines protruded from her lower jaw like a boar. Her eyes were the worst, however. They were just two empty sockets, a couple of gaping caverns that crawled with tiny spiders and centipedes. Mrs. Blackmoore yelled, "Ah!" like a karate master, and slapped the necklace out of Mariana's hand. Quick as a jungle cat, she bent down and swept up the shrieking children in the cage of her massive arms, clutching them together like a jumble of dolls as she executed a shuffling dance of glee. "Oh, I've got you!" she cried out in triumph, and she swung them around with a whirling spin on her heels. "Oh, mercy, yes, I've got you good this time. Now watch what happens when bad children break the rules. Watch!" Her handbag leapt off the principal's desk with its brass jaws gaping wide. It landed over Mr. Devlin's balding head with a wet plunk, briefly muffling his hysterics before the zipper snapped shut again, crunching through his neck in a great gush of blood. The bag fell onto his lap, letting out a deep belch as blood gouted from the stump of his neck and stained his white dress shirt in a rain of crimson. "The adults disappear bite by bite," she crooned, "but the children must go in whole. It takes a very long time to get used up in the belly of the beast. There's much suffering." The bag shuffled across the carpet like an inchworm and hunkered at her feet with its jaws hanging open. Ian heard a multitude of screams echoing from its depths, wafting out in an odorous breeze of sulfur and decaying flesh. Mrs. Blackmoore squeezed her armload of captives together until they were gasping for air, and she purred. "Who's going in first, Do I have any volunteers?" Mariana struggled to turn her head and speak. Mrs. Blackmoore tossed the other two aside and held Mariana in the air like a toddler. She whispered, "You first? Very well, bright one. Your light will be the fuel for many tricks and glamours. Mercy, yes." "You've already lost," Mariana croaked. "You can't feel it? You're done." Mrs. Blackmoore narrowed her eyes and threw the girl onto the floor, making her bag shuffle out of the way with a cranky growl. She leaned over Mariana and barked. "What's this nonsense? What do you mean?" "I cast a spell on you," Mariana quavered. "It's the most powerful spell I can imagine. You're finished." Mrs. Blackmoore stared at her in disbelief. She sneered. "Don't make me laugh. You don't have any magic. You're just a child." Mariana pulled a crumpled piece of paper out of her pocket and held it out for Mrs. Blackmoore to see. She said, "No, it's you. You don't have any magic. You're just a thief. You stole it from kids like us. We have the power, not you. See for yourself." Mrs. Blackmoore snatched the paper from Mariana's hand and snapped, Let me see that. What's this foolish game you're... What is this? She trailed off, her mouth dropping open in shock. The paper fell from her hand and fluttered to the floor. Mariana had written, Mrs. Blackmoore doesn't exist. TIDTIND. No, she muttered. No, it can't be. True, if not destroyed, Mariana said in a husky whisper. Nothing can beat that. You're finished. Mrs. Blackmoore bared her blunt, decaying fangs and shouted, No! No, you can't do this to me! No! Mariana smiled up at her, and at that moment, she didn't look like a child at all. She looked like a battle-hardened warrior queen, weary down to her very soul, but victorious at last. Mariana grinned her triumphant grin and snarled, Oh, mercy, yes. Mrs. Blackmore's face drew down a rictus of agony. She screamed at agony up at the ceiling, her entire body shaking like a skyscraper caught in the throes of an earthquake. She bellowed, How dare you! And exploded into a million fragments of nothing. Blam! The interior of the office was belted by a blast of cold, fetid air. And then, she was gone. Her handbag reared up and let loose a mournful howl. It waggled over to the spot where its mistress had disappeared and flopped down, whimpering piteously as it rolled around on the floor. Mariana spied Mr. Devlin's pen lying beside a leg of his desk. She scribbled another line on the piece of paper and snorted, She's gone, and so are you. Look at this. Beneath Mrs. Blackmoore doesn't exist, she added, and her stupid handbag doesn't exist either. The handbag flinched back and squealed in pain. It started violently trembling, still squealing like a tea kettle, then exploded in a thunderclap of displaced air. For a brief instant, Ian thought he heard the voice of the lost rise through in a rapturous song of redemption and release. And then, all was silent. Ian, Scotty, and Mariana all sat there on the floor for a while, looking at each other in deafening quiet. Finally, Scotty let out a weak laugh and said, You're both crying. Mariana wheezed, So are you, dipshit. She clambered to her feet and waved her hand at the door. How is no one pounding on the door right now? Didn't they hear any of that? What, are they deaf? Magic, Ian groaned, and he pulled himself off the floor. No one knows we're here, and they shouldn't know. Look at Mr. Devlin. How are we supposed to explain that? Scotty turned away and shook his head. I'd rather not look, thanks. Think we could just sneak out of here without getting caught? I sort of doubt it. Mariana gingerly stepped through the mess of blood and papers on the floor. She looked out the window and said, Remember when we would pretend the dragon tree could fly us around the world like an airplane? We'd stand under the branches and it would fly us anywhere we wanted to go, remember? Sure, Ian sighed. What's that got to do with... Wait, you're kidding me. Ian and Scotty both rushed over to the window. They looked outside with a mixture of amazement and wonder on their faces. And Scotty mumbled, No way. No way. No frickin' way. The dragon tree was waiting for them out in the schoolyard. He was sitting on its haunches with a patient expression on its giant lizard face, looking at them through the window with its mild yellow eyes. Come on, Mariana said softly. One last ride. Anywhere you guys want to go. Ian pushed the screen out of the way and said, Home. I want to go home. Me too, Scotty piped up beside him. I just want to go home. Mariana nodded in agreement. Me three, she said. I want my mom in my bed. Let's all go home. They crawled through the window and approached the dragon tree in a state of awe. It gave them an inquisitive look, and Mariana said, We're all pretty tired. We just want to go home. The dragon tree considered this and gave her an understanding nod. The trio of friends gathered beneath its mighty wings for the very last time, and the dragon tree launched straight up into the sky. Ian started to laugh as the ground receded below, and then they were all laughing. They hooted and hollered and laughed like loons as the dragon tree flew them away. But they weren't rejoicing because they were embarking on an adventure. They were rejoicing because the adventure was over, and they could finally go home again. Hey guys, it's still hot out. Like, unreasonably hot out. And you know what's great when it's unreasonably hot out? Iced tea. So if you guys like iced tea, check out Ivory Monocle Tea. That's my wife's loose leaf tea thing she does on Etsy. Etsy.com/shop/Ivory Monocle Tea. You can get a whole bunch of different kinds of teas on there. They can be made hot if you're insane, or they could be made cold if you live anywhere near the equator. So check out Etsy.com/shop/Ivory Monocle Tea, and you can get a whole bunch of different kinds of teas, from the fruity kind to the caffeinated kind to the kind that's named after Creepypasta things, even one that's named after me, My Dark and Stormy Night. And if you ask, when you order that tea, you can get a little MCP dabbing sticker along with it. Oh, also, I don't think I've ever mentioned this, but I sign all the cards if they're like horror-related teas. So if you ever wanted that, check that out. That's the only place you can get it now. So yeah, check it out. Etsy.com/shop/Ivory Monocle Tea. And as always, I want to give a very big thank you to everybody who supports me on Patreon. Thank you so much. A very big thank you to Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Stephanie Butler, Reaper61167, Bobby Karman, Tristain, Pelton, Chance Burnett, Diana Kraus, Thiccy McQuicky, SamaHigh, CrusaderChocobo, SpookyShel, Atomaurus, Grand Moth the Milky, Big Smoke 369, Captain Scurvy, SaltyIrishPoet, Estebean, Brayden Morris, Nate Kuhl, HorrorFan1212, Hour Minute Second Time, Kyle Reznak, David Martin, Scare-ington the Unkempt, Robert Malcolm, Angelus, Spanky, Snoochie Boochie, Seclude, Lupita Galvin, That Creepy Chick, Tyler Fletcher, Merxenum, Red Shadow Cat, Xavier the Cheyenne, Demix, Sean Cadieu-baker, 6 Gay Rats in a Trenchcoat, Turtleman, Rob Like Sharp Things, Cryolinian, Xavier Graphius, Lord Life's Best, Goring Tremagacy, Maria Walker, Emily Mitchell, Crazy Kid, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Eka Limchok, Dirt Diver 030, Matt Bach, Voice of Sand, Coffee Zombie, Hidden Tiger, Shelly J, Jeremy H, Psychomel, Nana, Deleted Account, Melted Lake, Tali Sue, William King, Darth Miver, Michael Ortiz, Satanic Aries, Bardo Hawk 764, Lambda M98, Harley, Sashi Suzaku, Cronut 509, Kaylee Ambrose, Suji Campbell, Stricken, Freddy Krueger, Happy Birthday Jason Wilson, Lisa Cottrell, Caspian, Hades Nephew, Tater Chip, Acid System, Prozac and Pancake Appreciation Society, Benjamin Welverick, Cryptic Nightmares, Kiri the Sloth, Fester's Lampshade, Sky Harbor, Nico Kyle, Rafael Rodriguez, The Ginger Bros, Aaron Stormcrow, Daniel Polston, and Corey Kenshin. As always, thank you guys so much, because you guys help me do everything that I do here. You guys help pay authors for stories and commission stories and do everything that I can do to make this channel and make this podcast the best it could possibly be. So thank you all for supporting me here. And as always, everyone, sweet dreams.